Good afternoon. It is a great pleasure to participate in this conference update on rare gynecological cancer, focus on pathological aspects and beyond, from the Gynocare, the cost action. My name is Ana Félix and I'm from Lisbon. I'm presenting soft tissue neoplasms of the lower genital tract, with an emphasis on the molecular changes that can be useful for diagnosis. I'll briefly talk about mesenchymal tumors, then go on the WHO 2020 classification, and I'll choose some topics to illustrate this conference. Soft tissue tumors are uncommon tumors, being the benign ones much more common than the malignant ones, and they are usually diagnosed by the time of excision, and they are distributed by more than 60 different types. Malignant correspond to 1% of all malignant tumors that affect the human species, and we have around 1,000 different types, and they are divided in soft tissue sarcomas, primary bone sarcomas, and gastrointestinal stromal tumors. We do not know much about etiology, but we know that there is some genetic predisposition, and these are the syndromes that usually occur with sarcomas. And in the genital tract, Dicer-1 syndrome and Cowden syndrome usually affect the genital tract organs. And Dicer-1 is associated with embryonal rhabdomyosarcoma of the cervix, and Cowden syndrome associated with lipomas and hemangiomas. Regarding environment factors, we know that radiation is an etiological factor, and fields like vulva or cervix, uterine, are associated with sarcomas after radiation therapy. Lymphedema is associated with angiosarcoma, and clinical exposure and immunodeficiency with viral infections are also very well-known etiological factors. EBV is associated with leiomyosarcomas in the context of immunodeficiency. So, studying molecular alterations of sarcomas can be very important because they are quite common in this type of tumors, and they have specific molecular events that can be helpful to define the histological types. We have some tumors that are associated with no specific change, but they have a complex karyotype. Leiomyosarcoma is also an example, and specific changes in a relatively simple karyotypes that usually are very beneficial to identify tumors. Tumors that have fusion oncogenes, and for that reason they produce a protein that have specific kinases mutation, or by gene inactivation or gene amplification. Is it obligatory to perform genetical studies to diagnose sarcomas? Not in all cases. In cases that typical morphology, typical immunophenotype, and typical clinical presentation are present, that's not needed. They can be useful to confirm your diagnosis if you have unusual morphological or immunophenotype patterns, and if you want to do the differential diagnosis. They can be fundamental to perform diagnosis. Recently, there are fusiforms, spindle cell neoplasms that are associated with special NTRK rearrangements, and these ones need to be diagnosed with the identification of these rearrangements. And they might be, genetical studies might be very useful for the prognosis. These are the examples where different genes involved in translocations can have different prognosis. And for that reason, especially because they are quite common in children, you should do the genetical analysis. So we are going to talk about lower genital tract mesenchymal tumors. Tumors that have been to define if they are benign, intermediate, or malignant. And if you are diagnosing a malignant tumor, you have to grade it. You should grade only primary tumors, and those primers were not treated. And you should be aware that the grading system does not exist for all entities. And you should stage these tumors. You should use the WHO classification where mesenchymal tumors were organized by histogenesis. And we are not able to cover all the types, and for that reason, I choose fibroblastic and myofibroblastic tumors, some examples, and tumors of uncertain differentiation. I'm also covering the most common tumor in the lower genital tract, that is leiomyoma, and the criteria to diagnose the malignant counterpart. We are going to present now a series of examples, and this starts with the case number 1, a 36-year-old patient with a vulvar tumor. We can see here the normal mucosa, and this tumor was sectioned, and we are seeing that it is very well circumscribed and has this tan appearance, a solid tumor. And on the histology, we can see the squamous cell epithelium, and we are seeing here a tumor. And it is quite important to notice that although it is well circumscribed, we are not seeing, here we could suspect, but here we are not seeing a capsule. So this tumor has, in this very low power field, we can see that has different areas with more cellular and other areas with very hypocellular, as we see here. So the most common and important characteristic of this entity is that the stromal cells, they cluster around the small vessels, capillaries, and we are seeing that intercept of these vessels surrounded by cells, we are seeing a more hypocellular areas. And this is better seen here, that the cells are plumped, are a little bit of a plasmacytoid appearance, and they can be cells that are a little bit more atypical, but we are not able to see mitotic figures in most of the cases. And we see here the hypocellular and the fact that cells usually are surrounding vessels. They can be plumped, ovoid, and spindle. And these are the areas that are edematous or more collagenous, and even have been described that a variant with adipocyte cells can be found. So what are the main characteristic of this angiomyofibroblastoma? That's the name of the entity. They are usually tan to white. They are usually small, less than 5 centimeters. They are well demarcated and rubbery in consistency. The morphological pattern is usually alternating hypocellular with hypercellular areas. Vessels are delicate and thin-walled. The stroma can be edematous or collagenous, and cells are myofibroblasts, as we have been describing. What are the immunohistochemistry profile, typically cells are desmin unless patient is postmenopausal, and CD34 is occasionally positive. What should be importantly positive is ER and PR receptors. So in conclusion, this is a benign tumor, usually not recurring tumor. It's uncommon. It's more common in the vagina. It's usually presenting in the reproductive age, can appear to clinician as a cyst, and they can present areas that are similar with aggressive angiomyxoma. The malignant progression have been described in one case, and lipomatous component also have been described. And this is the morphological characteristic of angiomyofibroblastoma, and diagnostic molecular changes are not clinically relevant and can be used if you are thinking about differential diagnosis. We move to case number 2 from a 20 years old female patient with a tumor in the pelvic region, and tumor resection was done with the removal of the left adnexus. So we are seeing here the radiologic image that was a tumor involving the adnexa, and we have here the uterus, and this is the surgical specimen. On observation, this was a monotonous tumor with this myxoid and edematous background, and vessels with different sizes and with some blood inside them. Cells were a little bit stellate, and we could see hypocellular areas and this myxoid matrix. And regarding cells, they have a spindle nucleus, and they were more or less ovoid in shape. We could see vessels with different sizes of from small capillaries to vessels with prominent wall. And the margins were very infiltrative, and we can see here the ink, and the tumor was arising to the surgical margins. And we are appreciating here the different areas. This is the large augmentation we are seeing here, that the vessels thin and thick walls, and we are seeing this myxoid hypocellular proliferation. And in this entity, it's quite difficult to obtain the total excision. Regarding the immunohistochemistry profile, we see that progesterone receptors were quite positive, CD34 was negative, actin was negative, and desmin was clearly positive. So we did a genetic analysis to distinguish, as this immunohistochemistry profile was not typical. And we did a genetical analysis with fish, and we searched for the translocation between the chromosome 8 to 12. In chromosome 12, H harbors the gene HMGA2, and we can see here the amplification of this gene. And this is typical of the diagnosis of deep or aggressive angiomyxoma. This is quite important to differentiate for superficial angiomyxoma, that is a tumor usually polypoid that does not infiltrate and is contained in the superficial tissues, usually has a multilobulated hypocellular myxoid stroma with some stellate cells and curvilinear vessels. So it's a different entity that doesn't have this molecular clue. So aggressive angiomyxoma is uncommon. It can affect the the vulva and the perineal and pelvic soft tissues usually is large. It is commonly known as recurrence because it's quite impossible to excise, and it doesn't have a metastatic potential. The main differential diagnosis is superficial angiomyxoma, as I told you. 2 years later, salivary pelvic mass on this patient were excised, the largest one with 6.5 centimeters. We are seeing that on higher magnification, tumor is invading the fat cells, and the immunoprofile was the same, Desmin positive, ER and PR positive. So the morphologic characteristic of different tumors, and I didn't talk about cellular angiofibroma, are here compiled in this table, and it's quite important to notice that it is quite difficult to do the differential diagnosis, and the molecular studies are quite important to highlight this aggressive angiomyxoma. We are moving to the third case, and this case I don't have the gross picture. Is from a 34 years old lady, and this is from the right inguinofemoral region, and we are seeing a very well circumscribed tumor with 5.7 centimeters. We can see that the tumor, as the other ones, has different areas, hypocellular and hypercellular, but in these hypercellular areas we can see that the vessels are ramifying, and the morphology of cells have a less cytoplasm, and they have a larger nuclei, although very bland ovoid nuclei, and we can see in the hypocellular areas that some myxoid background. And the pattern of the vessels is quite impressive here. We are seeing like stang-horn vessels in a very hypocellular tumor. And we did a lot of immunohistochemistry, but this is important because it's STAT6. This is a protein that is highlighted by the fusion gene of STAT6 with NAB2. And this protein we can present in the histology, and this is characteristic of this tumor, a solitary fibrous tumor with a lipomatous component. And BCL2 and CD99 were also positive. So this is ubiquitous mesenchymal tumors. They are quite uncommon, and they are more common in the vulvar region, and they can recur. And the morphologic parameters that are indicative of aggressive behavior would be size, mitotic count, infiltrative margin, and incomplete excision. And the last case, I would like to call your attention that we have been seeing examples of tumors of fibroblastic and myofibroblastic origin and tumors of uncertain differentiation. And we are going to finish with the last case. This is from a vulva, a 46 years old patient, that we can see and appreciate that we have this proliferation in the skin that is involving the hypodermis and invading the fat from this region in a honeycomb fashion. And we have this storiform proliferation of fibroblasts, and we can appreciate that these cells have large nuclei. We are not able to see the cytoplasm, but have this irregular chromatin, and we can appreciate that some areas have mitotic figures, although very low. And in the immunohistochemistry, this is a very positive CD34 proliferation. S100 was negative to exclude melanoma, and actin was also negative. And so this is an example of a very rare tumor, a dermatofibrosarcoma protuberans, that usually is a slow growth tumor with a tumor medium size of 4 centimeters. And the immunoprofile is positive for CD34, and PDGF are alpha and beta are positive, and CLB2 or CD 117 are positive. Recurrence is quite common because of infiltrative margins, and it is possible to have progression to a fibrosarcomas, and those areas would be CD34 negative. Regarding the molecular alteration of this low-grade spindle cell neoplasm, we have specific chromosome rearrangements, being the most common one, the embellus derivatives of the translocation that encodes a fusion protein with the genes collagen 1A1 and PDGF beta. So imatinib can be used as a therapeutical weapon. We can see in this case that we did fish in order to highlight this translocation, and we are seeing that we have the translocation here. And I would like to finish my presentation talking about the most common tumors, mesenchymal tumors, in the lower genital female tract, that are the leiomyomas, the smooth muscle tumors. Leiomyomas can be the most common classic type, as we see here. This is a polypoid tumor that is surrounding by epithelium, and we are seeing here two different areas of a common tumor with fusocellular nuclei in fusiform cells, and with collagen and muscle in between. And these are the most common type. Myxoid and epithelioid leiomyomas are quite uncommon, and usually atypia or mitotic figures are not common. These fusiform nuclei, we can see that sometimes they have a small vacuole in the tip, and they can be desmin positive. So in summary, smooth muscle tumors are the most common tumors. They can be clinically mistaken by Bartholin gland lesions, especially cysts. They have estrogen and progesterone receptors, and their progression to malignancy is quite rare. And of course, there are some criteria for atypia and for malignancy. The criteria that should be used in the vulva-vaginal region for smooth muscle tumors should be the same criteria that are used for uterine smooth muscle tumors. So I would like to thank your attention and to welcome you to Lisbon. This is the portrait of the Instituto Português de Oncologia de Lisboa.
So now we proceed to another presentation. So there has been a slight change in the program. So next in line we have Professor Olga from Athens, Greece, and together with Dr. Marina Makri. They're going to be joining us online via Zoom. So not sure if you can hear us, Professor Olga.
Yes.
Hello, and I can see you on my PC. We just need to project you on the main screen.
Great. So I'm now sharing my screen.
Okay, and you can give us yes. Okay.
You can see it.
Yes, and we can see it from our end as well. Thank you so much, and thank you for making time to be with us. So just a small introduction. So basically, Professor Olga, she is the lead of Working Group 3, which is the working group dealing with the legal and ethical aspects, especially when it comes to informed consent and to biobanking. And she basically comes, among her many different hats. I mean, she comes from the Biomedical Research Foundation of the Academy of Athens in Greece, and she is very well known in the circle of ELSI, and in fact she's going to be talking to us about ELSI in the field of biobanking. So the floor is yours, Olga. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for changing the program after this last minute. We really do appreciate as a group.
It's a pleasure.
Both Ms. Marina Macri and myself. And we are very happy to be invited to such a wonderful, well-organized and very, very useful workshop. Apologies for not being able to be there today in person. So we would like to give a presentation around the ELSI issues in the field of biobanking, which is of course a very wide issue. The thematic is very big, so we will choose to narrow down our presentation to 4 basic issues. The first is to provide some basic knowledge of some ELSI issues in the field of biobanking, focusing on the field of my expertise, which is data protection. We will also talk about some practical issues which come from experience. And as Jean said, I have many hats on my head, but the most basic one of them is that I'm an in-house lawyer for a biomedical research foundation, which means that I handle all this material and data transfer agreements in my everyday practice. So I would like to give you my experience and some information around these practical issues. Then Marina, who will present herself afterwards, and she holds a background, a very strong background, and I would dare say very charming combination of psychology and biology, which makes her very, very suitable to talk to us about the genetic counseling in biobanking and about how people are approached or should be approached when being counseled about genetic issues. And last but not least, we will provide you an insight of the last researchers in biobanking. So with no further delay, when we talk about protocols in the biomedical research, we keep in mind that, of course, they have a scientific impact, which is the first and the most important thing that researchers are looking for, but they also have a side of social impact, because the end result of research should also be a product. Either this is a medicine or this is a new method, something that goes back to society and something that helps people have better treatments and, after all, a better quality of life. A researcher should be aware, however, of some important ethical key principles when conducting research with human beings. And bioethicists across the world, we have concluded to some basic key principles. Of course, there is some argument of whether these ones that we present here, the autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice, are before only key principles. Some ethicists would say no, there are even more. Some would say that autonomy is not the first one, it's not the most important. Why do you always put it first on the list? But we have made this agreement, so this is why I just present you this 4 principles here. This presentation is not about bioethical issues, so I just always want to stress out when we talk about key principles. So these have been operationalized in various soft laws, and these soft laws apply with their terms to biobanking research. Raw principles by themselves can serve as means to verify whether the research complies, and this is an exercise that members of research ethics committees do. Here are some international instruments, whether they are soft law or whether they are hard law. They always apply when we have to deal with biobanking, especially in the lack of a specific national legislation. There are a few just countries in the field of biobanking who actually do have a specific national legislation to regulate the biobanks. With our team at B3 Africa, that is a project that I participated some time ago. and with some colleagues from BBMRI, our headquarters, we decided to produce a checklist for the researchers. It is actually under review at this point of time, so unfortunately we cannot disclose more information about that. But we concluded that there are 4 important steps that research need to see carefully and scrutinize before going out and producing their research. And in order to have an LC sustainable protocol, these 4 steps need to be applied. First and foremost, the designing of the research protocol should have all these ethical principles that I described before. Secondly, the participant recruitment, sample, and data collection has to be done with a lawful and legally and ethically sound way. Third, specific standards need to be applied for the handling of samples and data. And then fourth, some specific also regulations or soft law guidelines or ethical guidelines have to be taken carefully into consideration when and before disseminating the research results. At the recruiting phase, one of the most important things that needs to be taken into careful consideration is the social awareness and community engagement. And this is a way to build trust between researchers and participants. Numerous studies have shown that if this step is not carefully taken into consideration and carefully designed, then this might jeopardize the whole research protocol. Promotion of transparency and the benefit of the participants that will participate and the community at large are also important factors that have to be taken into consideration. Also, the eligibility of the participants, the age factor, the sex factor, the rights and interests of vulnerable groups. There's a very long discussion ongoing right now for the minors and their participation, especially in the area about omics, and if they give their consent at one age, their parents give their consent. And does that mean that they lose the right to go back at a later age, still yet minors, and revoke their initial consent of the parents? These are issues that need to be carefully considered already in the recruiting phase and be incorporated into the informed consent. Transparency of research procedures and methods, as well as the scientific goal, is of course essential, a building block in order to enhance the trust and the community engagement. And as I talked to you before, the number of studies out there about these issues, the ones that we scrutinized because this paper came out of the Reactive Project was about the African communities. And these studies that we carefully studied showed that African traditional communities believe, for example, that blood could be used for witchcraft if given for research purposes or if given out of their body. So, and also they believe that donating samples may be offensive to their ancestors in some way. So, depending on the specific cultural beliefs, this might change the protocol itself and the needs of the recruiting. These are some important issues that need to be tackled when we talk about the consent form and what a consent form has to include. The risks and benefits, of course, of the research protocol, some data protection issues such as why we use the purpose limitation, why we use the data, for which purpose we use that, the retention period, data retention period, where the data can be deleted, whether this participation is voluntary or not, what are the needs to withdraw the consent if it's a minor or specific issues that are applied, and also national legislation. What happens with incidental findings, and what happens to the data and the rights that the subjects have for the data, especially when it comes to Europe, Gynocare applies. So the main concern when having this protocol and designing the protocol when it comes comes to privacy is that we do not treat human subjects as full of information, but in respect to their privacy and offer them back all the rights that apply. So I just say here about GDPR, about standards, we are all aware by now that when we talk about supervised data, we don't talk about anonymized data, these are two totally different concepts. This is of course not something new in research. Supervisation process was like dated back forever, data were always coded. And when it comes specifically to the rights, and the rights that GDPR gives, there are some exceptions for the national legislation for specific rights. These will change greatly, and we are at the stage now that research needs to be further promoted. So the European legislator understood that GDPR brought more complexity than resolving some issues already which were out there. And the fragmentation that we have noticed being there at the national level made the European legislator bringing him like in the position to actually regulate the involvement or have a new draft regulation for the European health data space, as we say, in order to regulate, among others, also the secondary use of data. And this regulation, it seems that it does, to a great extent, indeed promote secondary use of health data without the inconsistencies that perhaps the informed consent brings in some, the legal basis on the informed consent brings us. But on the other hand, there is some criticism, which is not part of the speech, of course, today, but it is, we are expecting some debate before the final text is finally voted. And as for practical issues that I promised before from my practical experience as an in-house lawyer, when we talk about transferring of data and material, we do that in form of an agreement. So these are the notorious MTAs and ETAs, and collectively we call them just printer agreements. They always have a provider and a receiver. So it's usually a bilateral agreement where two entities or two physical people, two researchers, what they finally have, and two entities, two research institutions or academies or a company and a university. The actual combinations are many. And these agreements promote, among other things, the secure data and material transfer, not only by means of like physical entity, not just that the material will like safe. There are other protocols and other guidelines that will apply in that case. But truly, legally speaking, we seek to ensure that the rights of the people who have developed the specific knowledge as a material, which may have a patent about it, or may have a trade secret, and so on, is transferred in a lawful way and without interfering with the rights. So it is an agreement itself, but an agreement can never guarantee that the contractual parties will act, as we see, bona fides, which means will act according to morals and according to good faith. So here comes the lawyer's part, the legal department's part, and before getting into a material or data transfer agreement, before handling or sending out material to another country, company, you name it, all the terms for these research and transfer agreements have to be negotiated and have to be checked out by an in-house, most especially the lawyer. And these agreements is advisable are not negotiated by the researchers themselves, because that can hinder some not very good nasty surprises. So responsible and that's so clear that they're always the legal departments. And when it comes to the information that these agreements include, they should include like the basics, like the name and the full address of the providing and receiving institution, some basic stuff about the PI, who's signing, the name of the legal representative, practicalities, detailed, of course, like description of the data material, and of course the costs related to all these procedures. And it is worth noting here that it's important to describe how exactly the data will be used or the material, and an acknowledgement that provider. And of course, the national legislation, some confidentiality, binding terms, and if this data is transferred or material from, especially when it comes to data, personal data, goes out from the EU to third countries, then compliance with Gynocare that is actually followed. And the effective date. Determination of date and jurisdiction is also advisable, but in some cases, in most cases, my experience shows me that we usually choose to go silence of laws, which means that we did not actually declare what jurisdiction we will follow, we just go silent, and then if by any bad chance something happens, something occurs in the future, then we will see which law, which jurisdiction will apply. And here just some information for you, some research out there about the litigation that has taken place on a European level. We have just 23 cases for the misuse of material transfer agreements. So you can understand 23 out of cases I check usually per week or maybe for 3 days, depending on the projects in the foundation that I work for. So this is a very, very minor amount, which is good, which means that it's a proof that researchers do actually follow the rules. And here, finally, I would like to give you, before giving the floor to Marina, some templates that were drafted within the project Weekly Africa, and are part also of the research that will be published soon about the checklist. And perhaps they can serve also as a tool for MTAs and DTAs. I believe that the presentations will be disseminated, so you have plenty of time to check them. So before passing the floor, we started doing this presentation with Marina and thought about inserting her expertise in the field and allowing us to talk to us about what happens when new knowledge is potentially used, which is helpful for the patient. What happens when we have, for example, an incidental finding that shows that the person who donated material data for research might have a disease, might in the future, with possibilities like 30% or even less. What happens then? Do you disclose the information? What should be done? And Marina, the floor is yours to give us your perspective and what's going on in the field about genetic counseling and biobanking.
Thank you, Olga. I'm working in a biomedical research foundation of academic partners with Olga in the field of healthy issues. I am a biologist and genetic counselor and also a PhD student in medical school of Ashton University of Thessaloniki. And in my talk, I will talk to you about genetic counseling services within biobanks, and also we will focus on ethical issues in this field and the ways to move forward. So, can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. As we know, biobanking and also genetic tests are very important in personalized medicine and disease prevention. And according to recent research, at least relatives of the 30 million Europeans affected by genetic conditions may be later recognized normalized appropriately due to the lack of knowledge about genetics and biobanking, and also due to the acute and healthcare professionals. And this is a very important issue. And also this contravenes the European Union aims and the European Society of Human Genetics goals to create safe, efficient, patient-centered and sustainable health care system. As we know, individuals' understandings about what biobanking and also genetics tests can achieve, what it cannot achieve, and the risks they pose should be realistic, and this is a very important goal. Genetic tests can increase risk, possible harm. However, when well-informative and supportive genetic counseling sessions take place, the genetic information can cause behavioral tailored changes and also enhance decision-making that can work as predictive measures for their disease.
I think we've lost your voice, Marina. I think we've lost your voice. Maybe you pressed unmute by mistake.
She lost the internet connection.
Ah.
Maybe Olga could be.
I think she lost her internet connection. Olga, maybe you want to take over?
Yes, until she...
Yes, until she reconnects, if that's okay.
When she connects, let me know. So,
Okay.
the needs for healthcare professionals, the profession of genetic counsel is established or developing in more than 11 European countries, so we can see that it's something in progress. There is, of course,
Okay,
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
It's okay, thank you.
Unstable internet connection, so I apologize.
No worries, Marina. It's the joys of technology. No worries.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm sorry for that. As Olga said, the profession of genetic counseling is established. However, there's a lack of genetic counseling training programs, and also few healthcare professionals are prepared to address biobanking issues and genetic risks in order to achieve, in order to advise patients and manage the psychological impact of the dispossessed relatives. In this slide, we can take a look on the global estimate of trained counselors, and we can understand that there is less than 1,000 counselors in Europe. And also in the next slides, there is a table describing the number of the counselors in each European country, and we can understand that there are huge counselors in Europe. Next slide, please. But it's very important also to highlight and focus on what is genetic counseling. Genetic counseling gives information about how genetic conditions might affect a person or a family. The genetic counselor will collect personal and also family history, and they can use this information to determine how likely it is that the person or family member has a genetic condition. And based on this information, the genetic counselor can help the person or the family decide whether a genetic test must be right for this family. Genetic counseling, however, is the main topic of only few policy takers, but it is included in various recommendations for genetic services, even if genetic counseling is not mentioned explicitly. It is pointed out when talking about, for example, information, decision-making, and patient's rights. And now we need to focus on the ethical issues and the guidelines in genetic counseling. And according to the last research, the information, we know, of course, is common to the whole family, which can cause conflict. However, genetic counseling should be available to risk relatives. Also, tests will be done in the best interest of the patient and cannot be informed consent, for example, for the medical patient, or sometimes in the health interest of their family. And of course, authorization of the representative is required, but the person needs to participate according to their capacity. The thing for the children, in this case, authorization of parents is required. Informed consent will be asked always according to the situation. It will be either in written or verbal form. There is a chance that there will be discrimination or racial themes in the society, and also text that can stigmatize on the basis of one's ethnic origin. There is often conflict between confidentiality and to warn and provide care and explain the right to know and the right not to know. And please, in the next slide. And also there's a few issues about non-business which needs to be certain to the patient. It does not mean abandoning patient, but personal convictions to the counselors should not be involved. The counseling needs to respect individual values and cultures, and no pressure should be put to the counselee, and every decision should be equally accepted. Also, confidentiality needs to be as certain to the patients, that the patient's private information needs to be protected from third parties. The rights to know and not know genetic information are both important. And it is also a very important highlight that everyone should have equal access to genetic testing and genetic counseling. Now, we need also to pay attention on genetic counseling services within biobanks. And as we know, biobanks are of obvious significance to genetic counseling, as this type of research has the potential to improve diagnostic and treatment options for a broad range of genetic disease. Also, biobanks are relevant to genetic counseling in terms of the healthy ramifications, and this involvement has included localizing concerns from patient advocacy, practitioner, and policy perspectives. Due to their multi-role position as clinicians, counselors, advocates, educators, and researchers and counselors have the ability to make a unique and valuable contribution to the ongoing violence pursuit. And also there are numerous mechanisms for this input, such as bioman-governance, patient advocacy, psychological distress, and of course research and recruitment strategies. Also, counselors may become involved in conducting local biobank research or national biobank organization, and such involvement has the potential to not only ensure ethically and socially direct research, it may also help facilitate a patient-centered perspective to the governance discussion, ultimately improving public trust and long-term sustainability in biobank. Finally, the counselors act as advocates to patients with disease, and in the early biobanking, this role is of importance in terms of ensuring patient contact, and 2 points are taken into consideration in the formation, operation, research direction of the biobank. In acting as a patient advocate, the counselors will help ensure that past research is not only acceptable but also desirable to those affected by the disease, and find that the counselors have the capacity to apply their extensive advocacy skills in the area of violence through multiple avenues, such as highlighting unfair practices and protection after concern.
And here
it's my last slide. I'm sorry for that, and I would like also to underline the way it's not to go forward, because it's very important to develop tools for evaluating the quality of genetic services, to ample resources for genetic centers to be safeguarded, and tools evaluating the quality of genetic services should be developed. And finally, simultaneously, healthcare professionals should be appropriately trained to inform their patients about genetics, tests, and biobanking, and to report further to comprehensive genetic counsel when indicated. And that's my last slide.
Thank you, Marina, because this also shows how important it is for someone to have, perhaps like you, like yourself, a strong background in psychology, because it's not about the information per se, but also how to communicate them, right? And what is the best way to break the news out. So thank you for this very important overview of the issue. I would just like to close our presentation with some last research findings. As I told you before, we belong as the Greek node, BBM right we are, in the infrastructure of the MRI area. And it initially began as an infrastructure, now it's an area. It's all about biobanking. It's bringing together the main players in the field. It's also supporting and providing some services, among which the ELSI services, and providing tools to help researchers. Tools such as the templates that I showed before, or help desk, which is a very interactive tool we have in the MRI area. And researchers can actually use it to pose questions to the experts. And the MRI area was granted, and it received some actually great amounts of money, some millions of euros to begin as part of the seventh framework program, and then move on to the Horizon 2020 National Horizon. And this is some of the services that are provided. We belong to the Greek node coordination, and this is our ELSI team, people working for the ELSI team. Also has an expertise in data, is Ms. Alexandra Ziaka. And together the three of us are working also as the ELSI team of B1G, the project Beyond 1 Million Gene project, which provides coordination to the 1 Million Genes initiative. We worked here at the work package 2, so the deliverable we mainly have is to make the analysis of the legal framework and contribute to the development of the common minimum standard across the EU. To fulfill this target, this very ambitious target and goal, we organized 4 workshops. Malta was also invited to them, Italy, Spain. You can see all the countries here that were invited. 20 in total experts in the field came and gave their speaks, and the result of this will be published out. And here are also some other very useful resources and some transfer agreements and some papers out there for the issues we discussed before. So in case you have any questions, we're here for you, and these are our emails. Thank you so much, and I do hope that we are in time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Olga. Thank you, and both Olga and Marina. Very informative. You are actually the only lawyer in the group, and of course, I mean, it's very good because, I mean, it's very important because, of course, I mean, as clinicians and as scientists and as multidisciplinary team, I mean, having the legal and the ethical expertise is super important, okay, especially not just for this action, but even for the work being done, especially in biobanking, etc. Are there any questions from the floor? No? I think you've been very clear. So thank you very much, both Olga and Marina, and hope that you have a nice day in Greece. So I now proceed with the next speaker. So we've got Dr. Danica Cujic, yes, who is going to be speaking to us about biobanking and the experience in Serbia. So Dr. Danica, she comes from the Institute for the Application of Nuclear Energy in the University of Belgrade in Serbia. So Dr. Danica, the floor is yours.
So good day to all of you, and I would especially like to thank to Jan for invitation, and I'm very glad to be here since in previous period we had very good collaboration with colleagues from Institute for Immunobiology and Human Genetics, which is part of Faculty of Medicine here in Skopje.
Okay, just need to make sure
I'm a biochemist. So I'm not a doctor, and I'm coming from the lab, and I will try to briefly illustrate through our experience in assay development and method implementation in practice the importance of biobanks as source of well-validated documented sources of samples that could support and impede research, particularly in biomedical research. Institute for the Application of Nuclear Energy is part of University of Belgrade, and researchers are dealt with basic and applied research in medical, veterinary, and the field of agriculture. And translation of research results, research results are translated into laboratory service. We have medical laboratory as well as a laboratory for agrochemical and gamma spectrometric testing. The other part is production of IVD medical devices, particularly for oncology, endocrinology, and immunity tests. Oral activities are according ISO standards, and so far we have implemented 3 standards, and now we are preparing to add some new. I will talk about that a little bit later. Shortly after pandemic was announced in Serbia, our team of young researchers started on a project for development of ELISA test for detection of antibodies against newly identified SARS-CoV-2 virus that caused a worldwide pandemic. In less than a month after hard working, and mostly based on previous experience, and also in the fact that the majority of components needed for tests are developed, designed, and produced at our institute, we managed to make ELISA test for detection of IgM and IgG antibodies against SARS-CoV-2 virus. These are separate tests, and the only component that was made outside the institute was actually the viral antigens. That step was overcome in collaboration with colleagues from Faculty of Chemistry from University of Belgrade, who managed to synthesize recombinant antigens of SARS-CoV-2 viruses. And so far, we have 4 different tests registered at Agency for Drugs and Medical Devices in Serbia. In addition to tests that measure humoral response and detect antibodies, we also managed to develop an assay for assessment of T-cell response that is based on measurement on the interferon gamma after T-cells are provoked by specific viral antigens. In parallel, we implemented the test in our laboratory. So the tests were validated within our laboratory based on the samples that we collected from our patients, and also external validation was performed in Serbia from other medical institutions and abroad in organization of London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and the validation was performed in Senegal by Institute Pasteur of Dakar. Besides implementation of tests in our laboratory, INEP was the leading institution in Belgrade who participated in several epidemiological studies that were conducted in collaboration with Faculty of Medicine. And also we have one study that was supported and organized by World Health Organization. In addition to monitoring immune response from people who were infected, we also had several studies of monitoring immune response after immunization. Our results were also recognized by the government, and results were implemented in a green certificate as a proof that person is immunized and in somehow protected against infection. So far in our bank, or actually in our sample collection, we have several groups of sera samples from people that were gone through our laboratory in previous 2 years. The majority of them are patients who were admitted to our laboratory for testing. In different peaks during pandemic, we also collected samples from patients who were hospitalized based on severity of their illness, and also from COVID-19 convalescents. These samples were collected in agreement with appropriate ethical approvals. Also, as I mentioned, several epidemiological studies, they were conducted in general population in several courses. And also we have two studies in healthcare workers. One was to assess pregnancy in healthcare workers at the beginning of the pandemic, and the other was to assess how actually the risk of exposure on their working places. Also, we have samples from patients who were vaccinated, and also we have some special groups of patients who were interesting because they are immunocompromised because of their primary illness. And there are patients with multiple sclerosis, inflammatory bowel disease who were on biological therapy, and also end-stage renal disease patients who were on dialysis program because they are prone to infections, and also there is possibility that they lose protein through dialysis procedure, and so we assumed that maybe immune response in those patients will be shorter than in general population. Also, in collaboration with doctors from clinics from gynecology and obstetrics, Narodni Front, we assessed immune response at the beginning of the pandemic in couples who underwent IVF procedure in order to assess does infection influence on efficacy of IVS. Also, during those 2 years, we have samples that are collected in appropriate time points in order to follow up the kinetics on immune response. And our conclusion is that actually kinetics is person-dependent. And in a majority of people, immune response is actually long-lasting, despite of possibility that somebody could be reinfected. So far, we performed nearly 19,000 tests and collected more than 60,000 samples. In some samples, parallel testings were performed. That's why the number of samples is less than the number of tests performed. That is a huge number of samples, and during the time, our storage capacities were exceeded. So we had to find another solution how to store and actually how to organize those samples, because it is not easier and it is not enough to put the samples at the proper temperature for freezing. It was also needed to be organized and also to have appropriate basis for follow-up of those samples. So we get an idea to organize COVID serum sample bank and establish it as a national reference collection of serum samples from people who were either infected or vaccinated against SARS-CoV-2 virus. During the validation process and testing, we had some difficulties in obtaining samples that are actually important when establishing a new protocol and introducing a new method or new tests. There is a huge number of tests available at the market, but reference material that will enable standardization between different tests was not present until a year ago, and the amount of reference material available was limited, and we were not able to get that. The another issue was absence of control samples and absence of external quality assessment PT sheets for serology testing in COVID. Also, since we are unfortunately outside European Union, we had difficulties to order and to provide some of those samples because we received some answers like we do not ship to Serbia or the expenses were too high. The Institute for actually INEP and the Institute for Molecular Genetics and Genetic Engineering, also from Belgrade, were two institutions that gave most results in newly rise pandemic. And we joined our resources and our ideas, and with the support of USAID and UNDP, we conducted a COVID profile project aiming to improve scientific and healthcare response, actually to improve the services that we help in order to control and pandemic and to reach results and researches at higher level. Besides this establishment of COVID Bank at the Institute for the Application of Nuclear Energy, our other task was establishment of bioassay as a tool for characterization of immune response, and also as a platform for assessment of new therapeutic possibilities, and also for validation of new vaccines. For COVID Biobank establishment, a budget of 120,000 euros was approved, and at the starting point, we planned 40,000 samples. Also, this is initial stage, and in the future, according to financial possibilities, there will be also there is an idea to extend the capacity of the biobank. So ultra-low freezer as the main component, and also other stuff that will enable safe, appropriate storage and also management of stored samples should be provided actually in April 2022. The whole project was approved at the end of 2021, but unfortunately, due to current difficulties in procurement of medical equipment, this project is partially still postponed. We are expecting to get the equipment until the end of the year at latest. The establishment of National Sero-COVID-19 Positive Sero Bank as national reference collection has an aim to enable development of new anti-sensitive immunodiagnostic assay, and also to establish validation and harmonization between already existing tests. Also to facilitate generation of quality control material that is still lacking on the market. And the most important is to provide reference material that will enable harmonization and standardization of currently available methods. There is, for the best of our knowledge, there is no established biobank in Serbia. And responsibility for manipulation of biological material is under Ministry of Health, actually Directorate for Biomedicine. So far, the samples that are taken after delivery for isolation of stem cells are stored out of Serbia, abroad. It is organized by foreign representatives and the distributors, and each sample needs to obtain special export license. So the storage of stem cells as biological material is very difficult because there is no established biobank in Serbia. A few years ago, at the Clinical Center of Serbia, at Clinics for Gynecology and Obstetrics, there was established a bank for reproductive cells, tissue, and embryos in order to facilitate IVF protocols, but unfortunately this is still under development, and actually there's no any samples that are stored there. Institute for Molecular Genetics and Genetic Engineering has a own small collection of tissue samples in the first place taken from patients with rare diseases. So when you're first in something, then it is difficult to start and to establish the protocol that will that will enable actually appropriate storage and that will guarantee that your samples are appropriate for the study and research. So when we are starting to organize our sample and to generate protocol for biobank, some issues raised that we are still thinking about them. And the previous actually gave a few very useful advices and comments regarding that. So besides legal issues, there is also an ethical issues because the samples were taken for testing in our laboratory is assumed actually as a sample that cannot be is an archive sample and cannot be used in combination with clinical and patients' data. So actually, we have only results of the test that is related to that kind of sample. We have ethical approval and patients-informed contents obtained from all epidemiological studies that are performed, but there is a question, could we use that samples for a new purpose that the patient was not agreed and informed as a possibility, or there is maybe possibility for those samples obtained subsequent afterward consent and permission. So these are some questions that we are still thinking about them and how to solve them. It is very important to have precise procedures for sample collection, processing, and storage in order to provide quality samples that are not destroyed and in order to secure that results obtained further are reliable. So sample qualification is also a very important issue. Biobanks are not static, they are dynamic. So you receive new samples, you took out some samples that you took previously. So we still need to define how long we will keep particular specimens. This is particularly relevant for those samples that are taken at the beginning of the pandemic because they are rare. They could be related to particular viral strain that caused actual infection. And now, after the 2 years, the majority of population is either vaccinated or either survived this disease even for several times. So the patients, so the samples from the beginning of the pandemic actually have the most value so far. Also, data protection and donor security privacy is also also important. And that's why we need to make a protocol how to code the samples. Samples need to be labeled not with the name and the patient's data, so it must be anonymized, but the samples need easily to be related to a particular donor. Also, a big issue is who is the owner of the samples, and also that was a part in previous lecture. So the costs of maintenance and the long storage are huge. So could biobanks act as how would I say? Could act as profitable institutions, or we need to provide financial support from government, foundations, and from other institutions. The management with the biobank also led us to think about introduction of additional new ISO standards in order to ensure appropriate storage and management of samples stored. the number of biobanks is rising, and it is very important to establish defined protocols and to ensure harmonization of results that are obtained from samples taken from different biobanks. And that is defined in standard 2307 that is concerning biobanking and general requirements. If you have well characterized and well documented samples, you could also prepare quality control material and you could apply, actually laboratory could apply for PT provider. PT providers are very important in monitoring of laboratory work and ensuring of fulfillment of quality control assurance. This is actually the topic of my lecture was quite different than all that we heard in those two previous days, but the process that we passed through development of ELISA test is actually the same process that is important for development of test for any other biomarker. So in order to have reliable biomarker, you need to have a good pool of samples, well characterized and well documented and connected to particular disease. That's why it is very important the collaboration between laboratories, scientists on the one side, and the doctors, clinicians on the other side, who are actually at the source of the samples. And we have collaboration with the doctors, but it is very often some problems that we missed some samples, that we got samples, but we missed the data related to that samples. And actually, the samples from patients that you have are very valuable, but in the most of the cases, they go to the waste instead of some repository that will serve for future research in order to explain some disease or to enhance and improve the treatment or diagnosis of particular disease. So I'm kindly asked to collaborate with your colleagues from laboratories and also from us, from researchers from institutes and from medical colleges and faculties. And so if you allow, based on the few words that we had on the yesterday MC meeting and the possibility that Serbia might be organizer of meeting, actually, I would be very proud if you decided to be in Serbia. I also spoke with colleague Professor Mandic. So here are some few pictures as a teaser. So this is our institute, INEP, that is in Zemun. Zemun is part of Belgrade, and we have a very nice view on River Danube and also on Belgrade. And currently there is an ongoing project of establishment of Biofor Campus, that will join researchers from different institutions and faculties in biomedical research, and that project is now started, and we are expecting that we will have a large campus for biomedical research in next 2 or 3 years. So thank you for your attention. Okay, thanks. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
So, thank you very much to Dr. Danica, and thank you very much also for the invitation to come to Serbia. So, we did have discussion with Professor Mandic as well, so we seem to have found the place for the final conference. Okay, so it's all planned out next year, so keep your diaries free, and as soon as I have the exact dates, I will of course be informing you. Okay. Any questions to Dr. Danica about her presentation? No? Yes. So I think, yes, I think we can proceed for lunch. Unfortunately, we had one lecture, but the doctor doing that lecture was caught up with work, so we'll proceed to lunch. I mean, we're well in time anyway. And we'll meet again at 1:30. I'll just confirm. So yes, we'll meet again at 1:30. So those of you who are online, okay, we'll meet you in 1 hour's time. Thank you so much.